Welcome everybody. Welcome to this month's Uspire Discover. We've been running these sessions more or less monthly for a little while now, about 18 months. And our intention is to bring together commercial leaders and other leaders who are interested in the topic that we run monthly. Because our vision at Uspire, and those of you who've been on the Discovery Days before and know us know that our vision at Uspire is actually to bring together and enable a community of the finest commercial leaders in the world. And in order to do that, we need to meet you, we need to work with you, and we need to see your faces, either face to face or here on Zoom, so that we can bring you into our community. So now that you've come onto here, if it's okay by you, we will continue to keep in touch, and you are part of our community. So welcome, welcome. Today, we've got an amazing session with my colleague, Jonathan Brough, who you'll see there, standing around his very exciting whiteboard, on the topic of New World negotiation. So everything's changed, as we know, in the last few years, and negotiation is exactly the same. So today, Jonathan has created some new content, some new thought leadership around negotiation that he's going to share with you, and you're the first to see it. So congratulations. And we hope that you like it. Any feedback will be amazing afterwards. And I'm going to hand over to Jonathan to start our Uspire Discover, the power of New World negotiation.
Thank you, Amanda. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Thumbs up if you can hear me. Yeah, great. A few faces that I recognize, but great that you could join us. As we emerge from, well, more than 2 years of enforced lockdowns, it's pretty clear that we're entering a new world, and it's a new world of big challenges and potentially some big opportunities as well. It's also pretty clear that we will not be able to apply some of the techniques, some of the approaches we used before the pandemic, because they won't be effective anymore. So we're going to need to once more adapt and to succeed. And so it's with this in mind that the team here at Uspire have created what we believe are 8 critical elements for success in New World negotiations. And what I'm going to do today is introduce you very briefly to each one and give you some examples, and then we're going to get your feedback. And we're hoping to get your feedback through a series of polls that Amanda and Chris have helped me develop. So at each stage, we're going to stop, we're going to give you a chance to reflect and share your own thoughts via a poll, and we're going to use these polls effectively to direct perhaps some of the conversations in the Q&A, which will be at the end, but also we'll collate them and share them with you after this event. So hopefully today you'll find it, our goal is to provoke you, to energize you, and to help you transform your business. So with that in mind, I've actually got 2 questions that I'm going to start off asking you, and I think we're going to run a poll for them. The first one is about headwinds. Let me just explain what I mean by headwinds, and then I'm going to hand over to Amanda to run the poll. Headwinds is basically the challenges that your business is facing today, that are facing into, that are potentially holding you back. They're preventing you growing at the rate you'd like to grow. So hence the plane here, the wind's blowing against it. So if you've got a headwind, it's slowing you down. Some of the conversations we've been having with our customers, I've just captured in this word cloud here. So it might be freight costs, it might be capacity issues, it could be the war in Ukraine. So what I'm keen to do is to get a poll from you of the sort of headwinds that you're facing. And I'm sure there's plenty, and there'll be some that are common, maybe there's some unique. So I'm going to hand over to Amanda, and we're going to run the first of our polls.
Thanks, JB. So if you've not used a poll before, you will see come up on the screen. There's going to be a white box. In fact, I'll open it now, and you should be able to see that. There should be a white box appearing, which has got a question in it. If you can't see that, then just give us just pop in the chat that you just put a no in the chat, and Chris will put the actual question into the chat. So the question in the poll is, what are the main headwinds being faced into by your business? So I can see some answers coming in. Fantastic. Thank you. And I think this might just take us 30 seconds or so to do that. And Louise, I can see, can't see the poll. So Chris, if you just pop your answers into the chat, please, Louise. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And the question is, what are the main headwinds being faced into your business right now? Thank you.
You'll put up the poll response at the end, won't you, Amanda?
Yeah, we've got 20 responses so far. We will be having, I think they are just going to give it a couple more seconds, and then we'll see some answers. And those of you who have put the answers in the chat will be able to see those as well. So let's have a look. Okay, some questions still coming in.
There'll be quite a lot, I think.
Yeah, and I would imagine we'll also have some of our leader colleagues here who have got quite a few. So, okay, so we've got 27 answers. So I'm going to end the poll. Those of you who can see the poll will be able to see those answers. And JB, you might want to just read through some of those, or just to remind people.
I can't see them at the moment, so I don't know whether I need to just click on something.
I'm sharing the results here.
Okay.
So Amanda, it's Chester speaking. You'll
Chester.
need to go into sharing screen and show it from a web browser.
Oh, okay.
Live TV, everyone. Live TV, everyone.
Okay.
So let me then, while you're doing that, Amanda, let me fill the space, because my next question is surprisingly about tailwinds. And I think what we're hearing a lot in media and we're all facing into is a huge number, and we'll see them in the poll in a second. But what we're struggling sometimes to do is understand there are some big opportunities. So tailwinds are things that could accelerate your growth if you could harness them. And again, we've been talking to some of our customers, and some of the things that they've been saying are things like, for example, credit. You know, if you can't afford to buy something now, then there are some great credit packages available, which we could offer you to enable you to buy our products and services now. Some organizations have changed fundamentally their systems. They've created more insight in what's driving buyer behavior. And in many cases, they're across multiple new omni channels. So what that's doing is creating some new opportunities. So there are headwinds for sure, but there are some big tailwinds. And some of the tailwinds are things that I want to sort of touch on through bringing to life these 8 critical elements. So if we got a poll ready to run for tailwinds.
Hi, JB. I think we will go to good old chat for the answers to our questions from now on.
Okay.
Yeah, because it's a little bit complicated, more complicated than I thought. I'm learning. Okay, so we'll go to good old chat. So you'll see some answers from the last one. Do you want me to read those out from the last one, JB?
Yeah, just read a few of the examples out if you could.
So apologies to those who've written in the poll. What we are going to do at the end of this session is we're going to send you the answers that your leader colleagues here have given. So you will see all the answers to all of the questions, because I think that will be pretty rich. So we can see uncertainty over cost. These are headwinds. Uncertainty over cost of living crisis and the Ukraine. Then we have, I think, yeah, nobody else has put in the chat. Okay, so that I'm worried about the increase in cost of living. Yeah, buying power in households. Yeah, so thinking about consumers and households. Thank you, Richard. Great. Okay. So I think we'll go straight to tailwinds.
Okay. Well, while you're doing the tailwinds, I think what's interesting is there's 2 words there I heard. One was around uncertainty. So we have increased uncertainty, and that's one of the things I want to pick up through our 8 elements. How do you manage and mitigate some of this uncertainty? And then I also heard people talking about, what's potentially driving their business. It could be around increased competition. It could be share of wallet, which is a phrase that we heard some of our Norwegian colleagues a couple of weeks ago. They talk about share of wallet. So how much consumer spending power is out there, and if that's diminishing, what does that mean for our businesses and for our products and services? Let's have a look at some of the tailwinds. Changing consumer habits. Yeah. Interestingly, yes, innovation. A number of people have talked about innovation. There has been significant innovation throughout the pandemic. People have had to innovate and adapt. And actually, some of those new innovations are proving really powerful in terms of helping organizations grow. Okay, so I'll pick up on some of these. And what's important, I think, is that we have a balance. There's a real temptation when you're facing challenging times to only focus on all of the headwinds and to forget that there will be tailwinds. And if you can embrace and harness these tailwinds, your business can still grow. Okay, so let me move on and introduce the first of our 8 elements. The way I'm going to do this is I'm going to bring each one to life and give you some examples. And then we're going to ask a question, and I think it will be in chat now, and we're going to get you to share your views. So each one will take a few minutes. So efficiency and leverage. What do we mean by efficiency and leverage? Well, let me take the first part of that. The efficiency for us is all about how much does it cost you to sell your products? So what's the cost of sale to your customers? But also how much is the cost to serve for you from your suppliers? So when your suppliers look at trading with you, how much does it cost them to do business with you? And why is this important? It's clear that there is a preference now amongst businesses to trade with organizations that have a low cost of sale and a low cost to serve. So question 1 I've got for you is, do you know what your cost to serve is? And do you know what your cost of sale is? Because if you don't, then you can't measure it, you can't improve it. If you do know what it is, what are you doing to improve it? And that could be through automation. It could be about how you deliver your products and services to your customers. It could be about how you buy your products and services and store them and draw down on them. So first thing is to think about your efficiency, because the more efficient you are to trade with, the more likely you are to set yourself up for growth. The second element is leverage. Now, I come from a procurement background, a purchasing background for many years, where leverage has traditionally been about how much do you spend. So the more you spend, the more leverage you have, the better deals you can get. And what we've seen over the last couple of years in particular is that there's much more to leverage than just spend. And let me give you some examples. The mix of products. So the complexity, how many different products and services do you offer, or do you sell, or do you buy? Okay, so the mix is important, and you can leverage simplicity. So, and there's some great examples of businesses that do exactly that. You don't have 50 different products, you may have 5 products. That allows you to leverage those more effectively. So simplicity is one of those things that you can leverage. Also payment reliability. So if you are a reliable payer, or you get paid reliably by your partners, your business partners, you can leverage that. It's very clear in the last couple of years, and we've seen it, those customers that have paid us reliably, and that tends to be where you put your energy. So you can leverage that if you've been a reliable payer. Your specification, you can leverage your specification. And in the current times where things are perhaps difficult to get all the components that might be on your specification, your ability to adapt that specification is critical. So how quickly can you substitute, you're seeing it now in the food sector, people are substituting sunflower oil for other types of oil because it's not readily available or it's very expensive. Whenever there's an availability issue in your bill of materials or your recipe, your ability to adapt, I think, is really important. So leveraging your specification, leveraging your footprint. There are organizations that have fundamentally changed where their capacity is and how they deliver that capacity to their customers. So leveraging your footprint. Great example where freight costs are continuing to rise. We've got examples of companies that are changing how they manufacture products. So we've got one in Australia that is now creating sub-assemblies in Australia that they can then pull together rather than importing those. And that's because the freight cost is so high now, it doesn't make sense to bring together all the individual components any other way. So leveraging your footprint, changing how you deliver your products and services is something you might want to consider. Leveraging your values. Now, this is one which I think, I'll give you an example in a second. I think as a business, we try to do this. If you have very clear values, and sustainability is a really good example, you can leverage those to help you grow. So just as a simple example, the bank that I have changed to for my own banking, which I changed to a couple of months ago, every time I recommend them to another customer, they plant a tree. So that is a good example of a business that's leveraging its values to drive growth. So sustainability could be one of the values that might drive growth in your business. Leveraging the capabilities in your team. So again, we talk about leveraging spend, but actually, do you leverage the capabilities in your team? That could be experience, expertise, it could be languages, it could be coverage. We've leveraged as a business our master trainer network, because for the last 2 years we haven't been able to travel. So we've accredited and trained and master trainers all over the world who've been able to deliver locally. So that's a great example of how you can leverage your team. So the question we've got for you, and I think we're going to drop this into chat, and please do respond, is when you think about your business in particular, what aspects could be leveraged other than spend or made more efficient? So what aspects could be leveraged or made more efficient? I'm just going to give you a minute or so just to pop your responses into chat, please. Yeah, sustainability. Yeah, yeah, diversity, quality of people. Yeah, yeah, referrals. Referrals is a great one. Let your customers or your existing partners leverage on your behalf. It's much more powerful. I'm going to tell you I'm great, aren't I? But actually, if one of my customers says, no, Uspire are great, it's actually much more powerful. Balance sheet strength, yeah. Supply chain improvements, value of your reputation, yeah. Reputation, how trusted you are. So building trust takes time. It doesn't take very long to lose it. But in the current climate, being able to build and retain that trust is vital. Data reporting, good. So we've got some really good examples there. Thank you for sharing. Okay, I'm going to move on to the second now, the second element, critical element. Which for us is a pair. Now these, I put these together intentionally. They're currency and commodity. And why have I done that? It's often because the commodities are currency dependent. I'll give you a few examples in a second. And they may be different to the currency which you sell your finished product in. So let me give you an example. Wine. We have a number of wine companies we work with. And many of them have vineyards in South Africa. Now you will buy the wine ex the vineyard in rand, in South African rand, but you will then ship the product, and freight will almost certainly be in US dollars. And then when it arrives in Europe, you will sell that product almost certainly in euros. So as you think about the value chain of your products, and this is the same for services, there are different currencies that are linked to each value. each link in the chain. And actually understanding those currencies and understanding how soft or hard they are is really important. Even the hard currencies like the US dollar, the pound, the yen, sterling have fluctuated hugely. Now, traditionally, you can hedge an element of that, but actually there's often an element of it you just need to manage and mitigate. So when you're thinking about currencies, understand how soft or hard your currency is, and actually be clear at what point in the value chain that currency is relevant. It's the same for services. We talked about services that you might offshore. So if you're buying services, for example, in India, you may well pay for that in local currency, but actually charge it out to your customers in hard currency, US dollar. So be clear that currency needs to be managed. When we think about commodity, one of the challenges we're all facing is commodity indexes generally, doesn't matter what commodity you're buying, are tracking one way, and that's up. And you sort of need to come to terms with the fact that you can't control those or really influence them. And so that make you feel a little bit helpless. But the truth is there's quite a lot you can do. So for example, you can control your stock levels. So you can choose how much you buy and how much you store to try and filter out some of the peaks and troughs. You can actually control how much you waste or the mix of particular commodities you use. So what we're seeing is some customers are changing out the high value commodities and actually increasing the lower value or the ones that are more stable. So when you come to think about commodities, be clear of what you can't control and what you can't influence and what you can. You can influence safety stock levels. You can influence wastage. You can influence your specification and your mix. And actually, when you're looking in at the moment, there's a view that everything's going up. There are certain commodities that are starting to come down and that could be useful substitutes for you in your product. So when you're thinking about this element, I'd like you to think about currency and commodity as a pair. The question we've got for you is, and we're going to drop this into chat again, is what techniques could you apply to mitigate against currency or commodity turbulence, if you want to call it that? Okay, so what techniques could you apply in your business that would help you mitigate, manage the risk associated with currency or commodity? So give you a minute, please drop your thoughts into chat. Annual forecasting, yeah. Yeah, diversification, currency hedging, we've talked about a little bit about that. Not every team will have a treasury department, but there's other ways your banks can hedge for you. Increase safety stocks. Yeah, we're going to talk about safety stocks later. Book raw material contracts. Yeah. Back to back customer agreements. Yeah, you can share the risk. That's a great example, actually. You can back to back your agreements so that actually your customers or elements of the supply chain share that risk and things track up, but they need to track down as well, hopefully when that happens. Simplification. Yeah, so simplification specification can help you get to economies of scale and actually understanding factories' minimum order quantities. And some of that has changed over the last couple of years. Some minimum order quantities have gone up and some have gone down, and that's linked to flexibility and capacity. Renegotiate, yeah, perfect. Minimum order quantities, indexation. Good. So some great examples. Thank you for sharing those. Okay, so moving on. Let's start with, not the question, let's start with the next element, which is cost trends. So what does best practice look like for cost trend analysis? What it looks like is businesses that look at their key costs and they monitor them, but actually with a level of automation. And what I mean by that is they have certain thresholds, and when certain costs exceed a threshold, it will automatically trigger a change. So it doesn't require manual intervention. So a good example of this is where perhaps you want to increase the safety stock level because a component is becoming scarce or a product is becoming scarce. So you go into the market, you will buy more than you normally would do, and you will put it down. That helps you hedge against currency. It does mean you need more storage space, and storage space is, of course, also expensive. But sometimes that's actually within your organization already, so you've got more flexibility. So you can create algorithms that will modify these safety stock levels automatically as they're tracking the trends for your key materials, and that can be labor costs as well. So, you know, for example, farmers are struggling to get people to come and pick their crops. Now you can lock in contracts with those pickers and create packages that are attractive for them, that include accommodation and transport and travel and all the things and health that are important to them. You can lock those in when you realize that things become scarce. And a good indicator that products or services are becoming scarce is that the cost is rising. Generally, the supply-demand balance is what drives costs. As soon as things become scarce, costs go up. And we're seeing that across, obviously, key commodities, but you're also seeing it across potentially products and services that you might buy or you might sell. So if you're looking to guarantee availability, then having something that's automated to secure and replenish is important. And good businesses do what we call cost trend analysis, and they've automated the process. So the question we've got for you on this, it really is, you know, thinking about your business, do you do it? If you don't, how could you use cost trending to help your businesses and your teams adapt? So how could you use cost trending? What areas perhaps could you use it to help your businesses and teams adapt? So have a think, and please drop some examples into chat. Invest in an app. Yeah, okay. Now, I think apps are potentially great ways of presenting information on dashboards, so that could be useful. But you then need to do something with that information. But certainly, you know, apps are a very powerful way of sharing information and communicating the changes you need. Web apps so thinking about how you get in front of your customers or in front of your suppliers, and creating some way of communicating that is not bureaucratic. Yeah, so that could be great. Definitely be more proactive, greater anticipation. Yeah, so I think this is cost trending is all about anticipating what might change. So if you know the key things you need to monitor, you should be monitoring them and saying, look, if they hit this high level, I need to do this. If they hit a low level, I need to do that. Thinking about it in advance will help you respond more quickly, and good businesses do that. Diversify supply base, yeah. And that's a bit of a challenge at the moment. We'll talk about that in one of the later critical elements. You know, creating competition is really important, but that comes with its own challenges at the moment. Okay, moving on to the fourth one. Technology is an area that I think we've all seen in the last couple of years. It's saved many businesses, certainly ours. We wouldn't be able to. This is a great example of how we reach customers now. We wouldn't have been able to survive without technology, but it's continued to develop, and there are some fabulous new technologies that are starting to become more available. I'm going to give you two examples that we've come across. The first one is virtual reality. So when you've got a complex product or service that you want to demonstrate or share with your customers, traditionally, the only way to do that was to physically show it to them. It's clear now that the advances in virtual technology, largely driven actually by, I think, the gaming industry, have created new opportunities for customers to understand what you're offering, to visualize literally with a pair of virtual reality goggles or some other virtual reality environment. So that's an area of massive growth, and it's an area if your business is not thinking about whether or not you could apply that technology, that's a great example of one you might want to look at. Another example I've got for you is something called additive manufacturing. Well, what does that actually mean? Well, this is an example of a change part that traditionally would have been bought maybe in Europe and then shipped to perhaps somewhere in Asia or Africa to a factory. So these parts wear out and they need to be replaced. And we know that. This part here was actually, the design was sent to the market and it was printed in market on a 3D printer. So additive manufacturing is allowing supply chains to effectively be removed completely, the freight element, and then you send the design, you license it, and it's printed in market and then used on the machine. So that's an example of a technique. There are already businesses out there that are supplying change parts that are printed in market. So, and again, it removes all the freight, you still own the IP, and it's potentially, it requires you to have less of these items in stock as well. So additive manufacturing is one, virtual reality is another. One more I've got for you, which is recently I spotted that cement is, or concrete is in short supply in many of the developing countries. And there is a university that's developed a technique where they substitute the sand that goes into cement with ground glass that's recycled. So a sustainable objective around removing glass waste, but actually grinding it up into products similar to sand and then putting it into concrete and putting it into buildings. That's a great example of, again, of where technology is unlocking huge potential. So the question I've got for you is, what technologies that are already out there could be worth considering in your area of business? Again, if you drop your answers into chat, that would be great. What technologies could be worth considering that are already out there in your area of business? Improved machine learning, artificial intelligence, absolutely. You're seeing, I'm sure, a lot of customer support teams now have certain common questions where you have a bot answering you. Actually, they can be very good. Sometimes they're frustrating, but they can actually be very good in filtering out the easy questions and then only dealing with the difficult ones. The internet, I mean, absolutely, in terms of reaching consumers, you know, the whole click and collect channel really came out of people not being able to go and physically get their products, perhaps in the traditional way. So could they collect them from somewhere more convenient? I'm sure many of you will have seen these places springing up near stations. Actually, Finland were doing that 5-6 years ago. People went to work on the train, they picked up their products on the way back from their little locker by the station. Artificial intelligence, automation. Yeah, so automation, I think there's a theme there. Absolutely. Can you automate it? You know, the company that we spoke to recently in Norway, and there may be some people from that on this call, said, look, you know, they're limited by the space they have in their stores. So virtual reality is a great way of opening up the world of the possible to their customers without creating lots of perhaps store space or allocating a lot of store space. So there are technologies that are already there. If you're not using them, actually you should be at least considering them as a team, and they may well help you to grow. The fifth one, the fifth critical element is ownership. And specifically, I don't know whether Colin's on the call, but Colin is our chairman and works with us a lot on mergers and acquisitions activities, where we're helping our customers with their due diligence. Are you there, Colin?
Here, JB, yes.
Fantastic. So this is one which is right up College Street, which is about the changes in ownership. You know, and I think when there are changes in ownership, there are potentially some opportunities, but there may be some challenges. And Colin, you know, just I'll put you on the spot a bit. In terms of what you're seeing with the M&A activity you're involved in, could you give us some of the opportunities that that's creating for businesses, perhaps, rather than the challenges?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of things you've partly covered. I mean, there is enormous consolidation. So you look at most acquisitions, when people actually work out the why, they actually want to take on that target business in the first place. Normally, they've put together a pretty good storyboard of what the synergy benefits are going to be. And I would say that you know, top of the list normally is going to be looking at consolidating buying power. Yeah. Which is very much a key thing, and that buying power spreads across all components of the business. So it's not just about the raw materials you've got from a manufacturing perspective, but it'll be things like your mobile phone contracts or things like your IT contracts. there's all sorts of areas where on a good integration program, you can make significant savings. And that's why at the moment, with one or two vulnerable balance sheets, more and more companies actually are looking at acquisitions as a way of quickly leveraging improvements in their bottom line.
Perfect. Great. So thank you for that. And I think that comes back to the first item as well, which was the first element, which was about leverage. You can leverage your spend, but also you can leverage the capabilities across the combined businesses. You know, often you're buying a business not just because it has products or services that might be interesting. It may well be that it has talent or capabilities that your business doesn't have or would be complementary.
Another point, JB, that's just worthwhile mentioning, I suppose, when we're talking about the commodities at the moment and scarcity of commodities, and obviously certain crops and so on being impacted by what's going on in Ukraine, the one thing that's not scarce is money. So at this moment in time, if you wanted to leverage money or go or get debt or bring in private equity or speak to banks about loans and so on, there's an awful lot of money in the system at this moment in time. So again, that's what's making this type of transaction, ownership, mergers, etc., so attractive.
Yeah, thank you. So look, there's a few examples there that Colin shared. When you're looking into your value chain, just be aware where the ownership is starting to shift or change. It may well be that suppliers are being acquired, and that creates opportunities for you. It could also be a risk. So it might be a headwind, it might be a tailwind. But first of all, you need to understand your value chain and what the ownership is. And if you don't know what the ownership is, it's a great place to start, just to draw out your value chain and say who owns what element of it. Because there are some businesses that are even allocating capacity at the moment. Okay, so the question we've got for you is, are there opportunities being presented by changes in ownership in the value chain, either that you sell through to your customers or that you buy through from your suppliers? So are there any opportunities presented by changes in ownership? And again, if you want to drop your answers in, I'll just give you a minute to do that in chat. Time, good. Colin's example was leveraging buying power. Actually, sometimes there is leveraging distribution. So actually selling distribution channels that already perhaps are strong in another company. Let's see what's coming through. Sharing of office space, yeah, absolutely. In the new sort of hybrid way of working, shared office space, that could be a really good one. Collaborations, access to wider market, yeah, access to new markets, increased buying power, different skills, knowledge that complement absolutely existing ranges. So there are lots of opportunities out there, and some of them you may be completely unaware of because you're not clear who owns which elements of the value chain you buy through or the value chain that you sell through. Okay, moving on. The sixth element we wanted to share with you is about competition. And I think, you know, there are lots of examples at the moment where competition is beginning to disintegrate, disappear. And what happens when that happens is you get less choice, and less choice tends to drive up costs. So we're seeing it in certain energy markets where there is less choice, and at the same time you've got commodity indexes tracking up. So any limit of choice will increase risk. But there are things that you can do, and one of them is about managing and developing competition. So competition can happen on its own, or as a business you can enable it. If you're selling in the world of selling, and some of your competition may well have gone out of business in the last couple of years, then actually that's a great place for you to be, because your competition has disappeared, and therefore there's less pressure on you to maintain the price that you've been at, and also your market share may have increased. But in general, if you want to drive innovation, you want to drive the best possible solutions and you want to drive the right sort of pricing, then you need to develop competition. And when you look back into your supply base, you can manage that process. So if you see that your current suppliers are running short of capacity, yes, you could have a conversation that says, will you invest in more capacity? That tends to take time. Or you can go and find alternative suppliers that could meet your needs. So developing competition, I've got some examples I'm working with in the whiskey industry at the moment, where they are starting to go much further afield to look for capabilities that they would traditionally find within the United Kingdom or within Western Europe. So they're starting to look elsewhere, partly because of capacity limitation and lack of competition. So you can manage competition, you can develop it whenever you see it's constrained. You should have a plan of action to try and mitigate. And it could well be that you end up in even acquiring parts of the value chain to help you manage that. So the question we've got for you is, what can you do to increase competition in the midterm? And I'm really thinking about where you buy from, if I'm honest, rather than you don't want to create more competition for yourself in terms of selling. So what could you do to increase competition in the midterm, in the next 3 to 6 months? Looking at M&A opportunities, yep. I had a customer recently who was investing in a share of new capacity. So they're basically making an investment to help enable new capacity that would be allocated to them. So traditionally, that sort of vertical integration has been shied away from, but actually it could protect you for the midterm. Invite new people into the market. Yeah. Often we've seen examples where you have a good relationship with one supplier, and actually it wouldn't be a huge leap for them to move into an area that they're not in today. You like how they service you, and it might be you could just encourage them to make that investment in return for some sort of contract. Frame agreements, yeah, in principle, heads of agreement that say, if you do this, we'll do that. Co-invest in supply chain, absolutely. So a joint investment has two things. First of all, it's a massive enabler, but it also gives confidence in the other party that you're going to have some sort of longer term relationship. Can you substitute? How do you substitute? How substitutable are you versus your competitors? Okay, yeah. So thinking at it slightly differently, what's your unique point of difference? How easy would it be for someone to change you out? So that's another way to look at it. Good. Okay. So moving on, we're doing all right for time, I think. So 7, and I don't think we're going to run a poll for this, but I think for us, relationships, in particular the last 2 years, we believe out of all 8, this is possibly the one that is the most important. And I'll give you some examples. We've certainly got clear evidence of where relationships, the quality of the relationships is determining how businesses are trading. So capacity is being allocated often where the relationship, the long-term relationship is better. And it may not be where there's a short-term benefit in terms of the margin that you make, but actually there's a real sense that that relationship will grow faster and it's a better quality relationship. So there's evidence that we're seeing of people choosing the relationship, and it's where you get a values alignment. So as a business, we tend to work with organizations that share some of our values, and we try and avoid organizations that really clash with our value set. So sustainability could well be one for your business. There could be one around sort of packaging waste. There could be something around diversity and inclusion in terms of workforce, equal pay or opportunities. So when you're thinking about relationships, we believe these are critical, and they're going to be increasingly important in terms of who you trade with and who you grow with in the future. And the question we've got for you is really twofold. how good are your key relationships? And I'm thinking both customers and suppliers and partners. And what might they do to help you succeed? So that's the first element of the question. What, if you've got a great relationship, what could you ask? What could they do that would help you be successful? And then as a sort of second caveat here, what makes them good? So in your experience, maybe put your answers in chat. What makes a relationship good? So how good are your key relationships? What might they do to help you succeed? And what makes them good? If you would just drop your answers in chat, that'd be great. Joint supply chain mapping. Yeah, eliminate it. That's a great one, actually. Eliminating waste by working together on the supply chain, actually inbound or outbound. That's a really good, I've seen lots of examples of that. Advocacy, yeah. Company reputation, yeah. So actually helping each other build relationship through advocacy, through case studies, through shared examples of where you've overcome a difficulty, or perhaps you've made a difference. Sharing challenges early, yeah, sharing the vision and goals. That's a great one. Actually being clear both with your suppliers and with your customers what your vision is, and seeing whether they can help you unlock elements of it. It's often not until you've shared that you actually get some sort of emotional connection. So that's a lovely one, making an emotional connection. People make decisions very often on emotion. Certainly the mergers and acquisitions we talked about with Colin earlier, a lot of those decisions, when it comes down to it, yes, the due diligence is done, but it's an emotional decision about whether or not that's the right fit. Key stakeholders, aligning strategies, yeah. Nurturing trust carefully. I think what's clear to us over the last couple of years, and certainly we saw this, is where we had nurtured relationships and built trust with customers and with suppliers, those were the ones that went the extra mile when times got really tough in COVID. And they were proactive, and they made offers of support that they wouldn't have done otherwise. So we would recommend you to really have a think about the key relationships, and they could be suppliers, they could be customers, they might equally be third-party partners who are vital. If you manage and invest in those relationships, they will unlock some of these tailwinds we talked about. Value engineering together, yeah, there's a few more. Keep them coming in, please. Okay, so look, I'm on to my last one. In terms of time, I think I'm okay. Amanda, she'll stop me if I'm not. The last one we have for you is scenarios. And one of the themes that we'll be talking about in October, and hopefully many of you will be able to come to our event on the 19th of October, I think it is, in London, is about agility. And what do we mean by agility? Businesses that are able to adapt swiftly and effectively and embrace some of those really exciting new opportunities, some of those tailwinds, at the same time as mitigating some of these big challenges, some of these big headwinds. And companies that do it well actually do what we call scenario planning. And typically they have several different scenarios they're planning for all the time. The oil industry does this, but many other industries do this. Certain food companies do this, where they're looking at a best case scenario, a worst case scenario, and perhaps something in between, and they're planning for it. And by being proactive and planning, they're able to flick a switch when certain things happen. So when the supply chain is affected and they can't get the product from Asia, they're able to flip the switch and bring it in from perhaps somewhere closer, maybe Eastern Europe, maybe Turkey or something, or South America. So being able to adapt, that agility comes from scenario planning. And typically there are a few key elements, a few key things that will drive your business. If you measure them and monitor them, and then plan to switch things in or out depending on what's happening with these particular things you're tracking, you can be more agile. Okay, so the last question we've got for you is what could be done to make your business more agile. It doesn't matter whether you're big, medium, or small. So what could be done to make your business more agile? Again, drop it into chat if you would. Reduce lead times. Yeah. Easier said than done sometimes, but actually reducing lead times could be about where you buy the product from, whether you have an interim storage facility where you buy, perhaps as a consortium. We haven't talked about consortium buying. We've got examples of non-competing customers buying as a group and then storing as a group and then drawing down individually. People do that a lot in where there are raw materials like wood and plastics and what have you. Be agile yourself as a leader. Yeah, be agile and have an agile team. Have an agile thought process. Be able to, don't have processes that are straitjackets. Try and, when you see new things happening, look at whether they're a tailwind opportunity and how you could embrace those. So new channels emerging, new behaviors, new buying behaviors, new working practices, this new hybrid working. So if there's new things happening, embracing them. Unscrupulous prioritization. That's a great one. There are going to be people and businesses that will take advantage of the current situation and its short-term profiteering. What that will do is damage the long-term relationships. So you get a short-term gain, but people will remember, I'm pretty sure, those sort of behaviors. Empower your people to set risk tolerance. Yeah. Actually, by giving people an understanding of these elements, empower them to go away and go hunting and bring back some of those tailwind opportunities, and given some thought about how they could be incorporated in your business and in your negotiations. Great, so thank you for sharing those. So look, as a summary, and this was meant to be a provocation, we believe that these 8 critical elements will help you be successful in how you negotiate and how you plan to negotiate. Being efficient in terms of how you deal with your customers and with your suppliers, that will help you, and it will help build trust, but also build relationships. Leveraging not just your spend, but your team, your capabilities, your values in particular, but also other things like your footprint. Understanding what you can control in terms of currency and commodity and what you can't. And by monitoring the key things, adapting, reducing waste, changing your stock levels and your replenishment levels will help you to mitigate there. Doing it in a collaborative way with key suppliers will also share the costs and potentially share the risk. Cost analysis, and again, we talked about artificial intelligence, automating the process of flagging to your business that you need to make a change because something's tracking in the wrong direction and something else could be used as a substitute. If you're not doing that, then please think about it. There are some amazing new technologies and innovations that have accelerated through the pandemic and actually are now offering you some tremendous opportunities to interact with your consumers. So understand what they are and think about them in the context of your business. Ownership of your value chains, inbound and outbound. If they're changing, understand what that could mean for you, good and perhaps less good. Actively manage competition, particularly in your supply base. Gives you more choice, reduces risk, and potentially helps you build some of the key relationships. Please invest in your relationships. You will get it back many times over. You may not get it back immediately, but I remember my grandfather said to me years ago, Jonathan, be great and be nice to people on the way up because you meet them again on the way down. Perhaps that was a bit harsh, but actually what he was saying is relationships are really important. If you manage a relationship and invest in it and nurture it, was one of the words we saw, then that relationship will come to your aid and may well now be able to offer you some support in terms of developing your business. And the last one is to become more agile. And that's our theme later in October. But if you're not doing scenario planning as a team, thinking about what ifs and planning for them, then you will not be as agile as you could be. So that's my input and hopefully my provocation for you. And thank you everyone for putting your points into chat. We've got a bit of time, I think, Amanda, to take a few questions. I'm very happy to take all the rest of the team. Also, I've got the whole of my colleagues on as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Jonathan. You know, those 8 critical elements, if you've written only a few of the things that Jonathan has been provoking you with and the ideas that have come through from leaders here, then that is a huge list of potential tradables to think about exploring to support your negotiations at this time. So we've got time for a few questions. As soon as we've finished questions, I've got an offer for you in terms of some additional support to your business. We've got questions and any reflections actually that you've been, as you've gone through today, any reflections or any questions for Jonathan. So please do come off mute. I will pop your hand up and I'll put you off mute. Mark, thank you. Mark Harris.
Thanks, Amanda. Hey, Jonathan. A couple of the points you then raised around leverage and cost trends and scenarios. Just wondering what your thoughts are on the comments I heard you say about buying, storing, and then drawing down bigger stock and how that impacts upon cash flow, given many businesses working just in time.
Yeah, I've got a few examples. Actually, one of the ones that's worth talking about is a consortium that happens to be in the same area, industrial estate, and they realized that they all needed more flexibility, but they didn't each want to invest in additional warehouse capacity. So they created a central warehouse, shared the cost across everyone on that industrial estate, and they all had access to it for additional items they could draw off. What they then discovered was they were buying some of similar products, but from different sources. So there was two. They started it because of an opportunity to leverage warehousing, but actually then they realized there were opportunities to buy certain products in a more leveraged way. So that's a great example of consortium warehousing, which perhaps you may not have thought about. You don't even have to be in the same area. It could be your supplier has spare warehousing and they're prepared to extend that to you on a sort of virtual managed inventory basis. So, but absolutely, there's a couple of examples there where I've seen it, and particularly the last year, that's come from the relationship and being open about the challenges and opportunities and being prepared to share some of that risk. Thank you. That's great. Any other questions?
Any other questions?
Okay, and thank you for the feedback.
I've got a quick comment. Really, you obviously mentioned that we're going to do the Uspire Agility Code as part of sort of our next symposium, which I think is quite important. As part of that product that we've developed, a couple of things that spring to mind, which is this sort of customer-centered sort of partnerships and organisational flexibility, where a lot of the time in supply chain negotiation, you tend to go from the product you want and go backwards down your supply chain, and you don't invite your suppliers to go upwards towards the customer. And actually, you know, I've seen with a couple of businesses now actually opening up the whole supply chain so that their suppliers can see what happens when you're processing a product and moving it upwards towards the customer, which I think is an interesting sort of strategy to improve your agility. It brings them closer to everything.
Yeah, and I think that's a great example. If you look at the whole value chain, from the raw materials that you buy in terms of product and services, right the way through to the finished product delivered to the customer, sometimes you will find when you've mapped it, there are opportunities to collaborate that you would not have identified if you hadn't mapped it. And actually doing that process with some of your key relationships makes it actually a better and a more accurate value chain. So, you know, we've done a lot of value chain mapping in the last year. If you're not familiar with it as a technique, it is a fabulous way to understand where the opportunities are within and the risks are within a value chain. And there's some very simple, powerful tools that can help you manage some of the currency and commodity risks as part of that as well. So thanks, Colin.
Thank you. So if we've got no more questions, thank you. Now listen, JB, we call Jonathan JB in our business. JB has given us some great provocation. And at Uspire, we talk about provoking, energizing and transforming. And Jonathan is going to offer us a £95 coaching package, which is an hour of coaching and discussion on exactly this topic, where you can ask Jonathan anything, and Jonathan will help you to think of what your ideas and solutions might be around this area of negotiation. Our usual price is £350, and Jonathan's offering that for £95 just for the people who've attended, our guests here. We are also running our next session, which is on the 16th of June, where our colleague Mark Francis, who's our Director of Learning, will be running The Power of Presenting with Impact. So please do register there. The best thing to do is to register now in the chat. If you can manage to capture that, that'd be fantastic. And we wish you a fantastic May and June. We wish that you would be in a position to just sit back and think differently about how you're negotiating your with your suppliers and your customers, because it's, you know, we're in a position now where actually those who think differently are going to be those who win. So welcome to everybody, because you're now part of our community of commercial leaders, and we wish you happy quarter 1, quarter 2.